Today we have a very special guest joining us, Daniele Spethmann. Daniele is the president and CEO at Warrior Gold with over 30 years of experience in Ontario, Latin America, and Botswana. In her career, she has served as senior geologist and principal on 2 projects with significant discoveries in Venezuela and in Ecuador, and she's worked with some of the most well-known companies in the industry. Daniele is a professional geologist and serves as a mentor and leader in numerous industry groups, including Women in Mining Toronto. Thanks again for joining us on The Rocks. Let's dive in. Welcome, Daniele, to On the Rocks. I'm excited to talk to you tonight and chat over a cocktail. It's great to see you again.
No kidding. Even if yes, it's lovely to see you, Emily. And thank you very much for the invitation. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah. And first off, what are you drinking tonight? You kept it secret from me,
so
it's a surprise.
I am drinking Manhattan made with and it's a very favorite cocktail of mine. I very rarely drink it. It's a special occasion for me. A fancy glass, big ice cubes, bourbon.
That's good. What kind of bourbon?
The Kentucky bourbon that's very nice. The Wolford one, you know.
Yeah, okay.
I could have used just anything because it's a mixed drink, but I'm a little bit fussy about what it is I drink. I know I've gotten old enough, Emily. So now it's all about the quality. It's never about the quantity.
I'm about both.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Good. A tall glass, that's a good one. Well, I picked tonight, Basil Hayden is one of my favorite bourbons. And this one specifically, 10-year-old rye whiskey that Mark bought me when Prospector got acquired earlier this year to celebrate. And I picked this one to drink with you because when you and I first met and you were assigned as my mentor, right, a few years ago as part of a Women in Mining mentor-mentee program, we really clicked because we've both worked with our husbands and lived to talk about it. Right?
And stay married. You forgot.
Exactly. We're still married to the same man.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we also, of course, have both worked in some countries that other people would consider to be crazy or risky jurisdictions. So I remember that first time we met, we had a great talk about working in some of those places.
Yeah. And you know what's funny about all of that is it gives you an immediate connection because we've all gone down the same paths together. We don't have to explain ourselves to anybody. As soon as you say, I worked with my husband, I followed him around for 15 years in crazy ass countries. You go, I've been there.
Yeah, exactly.
Somebody doesn't go, why would you do, when you have to answer that question, why'd you do that? Because I wanted
and you chose to.
I wanted to be married.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Well, cheers to that. And cheers to having you on the show. Trying to clink glasses with you.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So now, of course, you're running Warrior Gold up in Canada. Very different than Venezuela. And where else? Remind me, where else have you worked globally?
I started in Venezuela, then I went to Cuba, and then I went back to Venezuela, but also worked in Ecuador, Botswana, Peru. Yeah, a few places. Very lucky. I'm very lucky.
Yeah. And were there any countries that you ended up going back to?
We went back to, there's many countries I'd never go back to. No. We did go back to Venezuela, and we got to Venezuela. The second round was just the pre-Chavez days. So we were fortunate to witness all of that. And it was interesting to witness all of that, especially after going there from Cuba. And it was interesting, when we were in Venezuela, early days, 1995, way back then, all the gringos, all the foreigners used to stand in front of the liquoria, and that was our club.
Is that the liquor store? The liquoria?
Yeah, it's the liquor store. Okay. And so everybody would buy, you would buy these little cans of cold beer, Polar, and you'd just go in and get 6, and you would do a round. And we hung out in the streets because it was hot and it was not so noisy as in the bar. And we used to bitch and complain about everything and this
Yeah.
and that, and they don't know how to do that. And then I went to Cuba, and then
Yeah.
I'm like, "Are you kidding?" Like,
Mm.
at least
What a
Venezuela, everything was available at that time. So I had
right.
never experienced a communist country and how a
Mhm.
communist country works, right? And then to go back the
Yeah.
second time and watch what was actually happening to Venezuela
Mm.
was very hugely interesting exercise.
Yeah. And what was going on with the mining companies in that transition? You must have seen a big shift in terms of, I would assume, the work that you were doing and the investment capital's appetite for going into those places
In the early
during
days,
that.
in the early 90s, people
Mhm.
thought that Canada was becoming too regulatory, and
Mm.
there was this huge initiative in Northern Ontario. Uh, I think it was called, I can't even remember what it's called. It was not. It was in the early '90s, but it was It was Save something, and they shut down
Mm.
mineral exploration in a lot of parts of Canada because we were going to
Mm.
designate 2% of Canada to parks, and the mineral industry
Oh.
got up in arms about it because it was like, well, let us at least take a look and try to assess before you make it
Mm.
a park, because
Right.
you can you can put a park wherever you like, but you can't put,
Right.
as you know, a mineral resource wherever you like. So
Yeah, you can't move that big reserve. Yeah.
that's right, you can't. And then the government of Canada took away the rights to mine Windy Craigie, and
Mm.
that was a big deposit that was found. In fact, there was an American guy who played a big role in that, and they weren't allowed to mine that, and that just shut exploration down in Ontario or in Canada
Mm.
quite significantly. And so then we all went overseas, which was
Oh, okay.
super fun and really exciting. There was a joke at the time, because the industry had shut down here. How do you find a geologist in Toronto? Taxi?
Yeah, and was in that part of the world was attractive at the time, right? I mean, I would assume everybody thought it was wide open for exploration,
And it was,
right?
and it was wide open for exploration with North American, European, Australian
Mhm.
exploration tools. So
Yeah.
so I had never in my whole entire life seen uh, an artisanal miner. So that
Mm.
whole thing, that's, they had mines, but they were owned by the state, especially in Venezuela, absolutely in Cuba. And it was
Yeah.
the Russians who taught the Cubans how to mine. And then Sherritt came in, and there was, but it was state run. They were state run organizations, or they were small family operations, right? And then the conditions
Mm.
were absolutely terrible. So part of the reason we were so welcome was that we brought our standards with us, our
Right.
health and
Your technology
safety
and your know-how.
and health and safety standards, and pay
Yeah.
people a decent wage, and
Mm.
and all the other things, that go along with being a foreigner and having good manners when you're in a country that, as you know, when you worked
Right.
in Afghanistan, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think that's where oftentimes in kind of the media or popular culture, even mining gets such a bad rap, and some of it's for good reason. We've got a history of making bad decisions and not doing right by groups of people historically, but there are also a lot of examples of where mining has been able to come in and create a lot of jobs, create a lot of opportunity, bring in technology to develop resources responsibly. It's tough to do that if you don't have a government as a strong partner in that, right? Where maybe it kicks off that way and then turns around. But there are lots of parts of the world that would love to have that kind of technology and health and safety standards come in and work with their
Well,
people.
and I say this now, with what is going on for us with COVID, all the money we just raised $1
Mhm.
million and spent it in Northern Ontario. All the money we raised goes directly to doing work that goes into the ground. So, and all
Yeah.
of our people had jobs, and they paid their rent, and they bought gasoline, and
Hmm.
they bought groceries, and we sent our drillers lots of money, and they hired people. I mean, The money we spend stays where we're working. So when we were in Latin America, all those people were thrilled with us as an explorationist. And I think it's really important to explain to people the big difference between what I do and what miners do. Because
No, that's a great transition. So please do explain, especially for listeners who maybe are new to the industry or just starting to learn about mining, what is the difference between exploration companies and mining
it's
companies?
huge. It's huge, right? We are looking
Mhm.
for that sunken treasure, that needle in the haystack. And so when
Mhm.
we go into a community and people say we're mining, we say, no, we're not mining. We're explorers. We're explorers
Yeah.
coming here to look. And the chances of finding something are going to be hugely challenging, but it looks promising. And so we go
Yeah.
in, and as an exploration geologist, I've always taken a little bit of offense, when people say you're in mining. No, I'm not in mining. I'm an exploration
Mm.
geologist. We find it. And then we hand it over to
Mhm.
the engineers who do the mining. And then and that whole process is a much bigger process. It involves a whole bunch of engineers and a whole bunch of permitting, and that's where the big money steps come in. And that's also where I would like to say, for the most part, that's where the industry gets its terrible reputation.
Mm. Yeah. Is at that stage.
Yeah, it's a big difference. We often, what is it? 1 in 1,000 projects, 1 in 10,000 become a mine. So
Yep.
it's you have to start, and you have to start somewhere. It's like anything. So we do the very first building blocks, right?
Mhm.
Before you get to build a mine, which is I'm just going to say a magnificent thing. Personally,
Yeah.
I,
I'm always in awe when I go to especially big open pit mines. Like you just stand there and you're like, "Oh my gosh, how awe-inspiring is it that this is where everything comes from that's not grown," right? I mean, it's just amazing that metal comes out of that huge huge big pit in the ground with huge massive, trucks running around. It's crazy.
and no wonder there's a bunch of guys in the business, right? It's like
Right?
there with big trucks and especially that end of the business. But I like to say to people, there are four primary industries:
Yeah. Hmm.
farming, fishing, logging, and mining. You have to
Hmm.
make a dollar before you can do anything else, before you get to build a school, a home, a car. And then the
Right.
next level is, doctors, lawyers, Indian chiefs. But the you have to sell, and it's the miners that produce the metals for the farmers, the fishermen, and the loggers to produce their first dollars. So we have to start
Right.
somewhere, right? It's a primary industry, and it's essential. And part of our handicap, I think, has been how people have done it in the past and all of the historical disasters, because people only cared about, the the dollar, how to get
Right.
that. And now, as you can see, the industry, and in my lifetime, in my 40 years in the business, has transitioned radically. Oh,
Mm.
it hasn't moved, well, radically, maybe not, but it has. ESG is part of the vocabulary now.
Right. Yeah.
That was never part of the vocabulary. Uh, there's another term for when exploration geologists go in, and that whole
Hmm.
sustainability issue, that all of those
Right.
conversations, relatively new in my career.
Yeah, and I think it's maybe at the leading edge, but it's something that we certainly notice investors care about, right? So it's and the money really pushes those things to the front. So if investors who care about those issues get more involved in the mining sector or in the exploration sector, then it will make those companies pay attention to those values,
Absolutely.
right? I mean, if the money doesn't care, the industry is not going to
That's
care.
right. And that is, for your generation, I'm just going to say, you guys have to care. You really have to care, and you have to change it, right? And change
Yeah.
won't come without people asking those questions, and without people opening up. And social media, this whole internet thing has completely revolutionized everything. I got one little antidote. When we were in Cuba in '95,
Mhm.
the internet and email was just coming to be. something, and it was like really because all of our time in Venezuela we faxed sheep.
Mm.
You know that terrible
Yeah.
pig? Yeah. We had a girl in the
Yeah.
office in Venezuela, that was her only job, was to send
Was
fax.
faxing. Yep.
You
Yeah.
know, what a curse, right? So
Yeah.
so, uh,
Yeah.
so when we got to Venezuela, it was the internet and laptops back in the day. I hate to date myself, but I am, were $5,000 a piece. So we shared.
Wow.
Yeah, so not only did I work with my husband, I shared a laptop. Can you
I don't know. I don't know if I could go that far.
Nobody could. Nobody could in fact, but not many people could share a laptop. It was such an expensive piece of equipment.
Yeah.
And then our team, they had these monster machines, and so when I look at what we're doing now, and I look at everybody on the phone, and our
Mhm.
I'm thrilled with the direction our industry is going. Absolutely thrilled. So it really is important for
Yeah.
this generation, the next generations, to just ask all the hard questions and make sure things are being done properly, and definitely open up that website, check out who's on the board, right?
Yeah.
And see.
Well, that's something you and I talk a lot about. Like, how do you look at a company, and as any investor, but in particular, folks who don't know a lot about mining, how do you evaluate those things? How do you even know where to start with the questions? And I think the board and the management is probably the first place you start, right? And what would you say to somebody who's new to mining or exploration? What would you suggest that they look at to make sure they're putting their money where their values are?
So for it's two. It's got to be both. So it has to be the asset. What are you investing in? So
Mhm.
if you're investing in gold, and you're investing in gold because you think it's a keeper of value, or if you're investing
Mhm.
in the metals that go into electric batteries, you have to look at
Mhm.
the countries in which that project is in. And then you have to
Right.
examine that government's record and how it treats its
Mhm.
investors. So that would definitely be, for me, be number one. And I would say that's number one because of the time I spent in Venezuela, in Cuba, you know, doing a feasibility study. Nobody wanted to lend us money in Cuba
Mhm.
because they knew we couldn't execute on the project in time. And then
Right.
in Venezuela and even in Ecuador, made discoveries, and you couldn't get a mining permit.
Right.
So what was the point of spending gazillions of other people's money, finding it, drilling it out, sending all that rock to the lab, and then the government saying, "Huh, no, no, it's ours now." Right? So,
Right.
yeah. So
And is that
look at where that is, and then look at who's running the company, and look at how committed they are. Go to the MD&As. SIDAR is there. You guys have Edgar. We have SIDAR, but all that
Mhm.
information is there. You do have to do some reading, or you have to go to Prospect. Maybe you guys
Yeah, I
have.
was gonna say don't go to CEDAR anymore because it's I hope CEDAR's not listening, but it's terrible and hard to use. So come to Prospector instead.
Yeah,
You can get the same documents
yeah.
much easier. But I think mining is one of those businesses where, as an investor, you really do have to do your own homework. Um, maybe not as much as people think. I think they think mining is super complicated, and it is risky, but you can understand it, right? If you do some research and look at the company, look at the asset, it's not any more complicated than putting money into Tesla, right? I mean, does anybody really understand how Tesla cars work any different? I mean, I don't, but people invest in the company,
They're
right?
cool.
I
Yeah,
mean,
but
people
there was
invest
a lot of
in
hype around it, right? You also
right,
have to figure out how much hype is around it. I mean, Tesla,
true,
Elon Musk worked super hard
yeah,
at his image. I mean, I can remember the first time I read about him, and I was like, wow, I'm going to invest in this guy. I didn't buy Tesla, but I would
yeah,
have in a New York Minute. Anybody who is that committed and that dedicated
yeah,
to making that kind of change, yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
with a vision, yeah.
But our
Well, so
industry,
you're
your prospect of our industry is cool, and
it is.
you got to figure it out. But it is so cool, and it is primary industry. So
Mhm.
yeah, there's yeah, just just do your homework and talk to people. You know, Our industry, as you know, is so small that if you don't know somebody, you can just phone somebody that who'd you work for? And you can find out about them. And if you don't have an immediate friend that knows them, for someone like me who's old and been around, I know somebody who knows that person, that will vouch for them. So.
Yeah, I think that's the benefit of it being a small community. I mean, there certainly are negatives, right? It can certainly hold people back who maybe aren't part of that club, or maybe who haven't been around for a certain amount of time in a certain network, right? But the benefit is you can pick up the phone. I mean, any company based in Toronto, I mean, you see the title CEO, but I guarantee you, Danielle, if I picked up the phone and called you, even off the street, I would talk to somebody at Warrior Gold, right? I mean, someone's going to pick up the phone and answer questions I have about the company. And that's very different than a lot of other industries.
And you know what's really interesting is my phone doesn't ring often enough from those kind of investors. It's kind of crazy. They go somewhere and someone tells them, "Oh, this is a good idea, invest in this," and then they just put their money in. And don't do that. Go take a look at the board and find the website and find the phone numbers and find the person you need to talk to. You have to talk to people. Yeah, absolutely.
I think I'd be interested in your opinion. My opinion is people don't do that because they find the terminology perhaps a little bit intimidating. And there are so many phrases in geology and exploration and mining that maybe folks are even nervous just to ask the question, because it seems like when you read, I mean, you and I both know you sit through pitches, and a lot of exploration or mining folks will use very technical jargon, even when they're talking to a finance person that may know nothing about geology or finance, right? And to an average retail investor, perhaps, or high net worth individual or a family office, I think sometimes that jargon comes across as, wow, like, I don't even know what the heck they're talking about. I don't want to tell them that I don't know what they're talking about, but you really have to ask the questions and say, hold on a second. I don't know what you mean by that. Can you explain that to me? And if they can't explain it to you, then you shouldn't put your money with that company, right?
100%. And the first question is, hi, this is me. I'm going to write you a check. How are you going to spend my money? Right? So you can start with the fundamentals. How are you going to spend how much money do you pay yourself? How much money do you pay your workers? What do you leave to your community? Right? What are your drilling rate? I mean, just you're writing over a check. Oh, when am I going to see a return on my capital? How risky is this? I mean, you don't have to be a miner or an exploration specialist. And any investment you make, when you say to Elon Musk, how much money do you spend on marketing versus raw materials to make your batteries? The investment community has, I feel, it's been designed so that we walk into the bank and we hand them over our money because they know how to put the money into your 401k. So then, so what I mean, I never understood the market until I was way too old, but till I finally was here running my own exploration company, and I watch it every day, and I still going to say I don't understand it. I don't know why. I get the supply and the demand and the volume and etc. And somebody's got a bunch of shares and they can sell them and it'll tank your stock, and it's like, why'd you do that?
What happened?
We didn't do anything wrong. We're still doing what we said we were going to do. So it's the market and the project are two different things. So hopefully prospector and this new generation of investor is going to just get super wise and super smart. And when you walk into a bank and they say, here, put your money in this, you're going to ask the questions like, wow, who's on the board?
Right.
How many people, what's their age range? What's their color range? Who do they represent?
Yeah.
Do they represent me and my friends in my community? So if they don't, they're not going to spend your money the way
you would.
No.
Or you want them to.
Or your friends would. Right? So, yeah. Anyway.
No, I think that's a really important point. And I know one of the questions that people always ask us is how to get through the marketing, right? Because every company out there will tell you we have a wonderful ore body, right? We have the next big thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting great drill results. We have a phenomenal relationship with our community. You're never going to hear a pitch from a company say, we're kind of mediocre, right? I mean, that's just not how it works.
Right.
So there is that base level of education that you have to be able to kind of see through the marketing the same way you would with any other industry, right? And I think those questions that you went through are perfect ones, and they're the same ones that you would ask for any other investment. You don't have to ask questions differently about mining or exploration companies than you would any other company. And if you don't understand the answer, then it's the wrong investment.
Absolutely.
Right.
And it's like, well, it's like the way you buy something. You go into a shop and you look at it and you see what it's made of. And then you see how useful it's going to be to you. And you touch it and feel, well, maybe you guys don't do that anymore. But at the same time,
not on Amazon.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you're buying a certain quality. You're buying a certain product for a certain reason. So before you hand over your money, it's like buying something. Find out if it's what you really want to own. Do you really want to own? I don't know. I'm not even going to go there and give you a terrific example. So.
Well, on that note, going back to you were telling some great stories about your work in other parts of the world. So what is it then that brought you back to Canada and to have a company doing exploration in Canada instead of these other jurisdictions?
Okay. Couple things. Our industry is hugely cyclical. So you're gainfully employed and everybody wants you, and then nobody wants you when you're at the front end in exploration. So we moved around because that was the nature of who we were and how we wanted to work. We came back to Canada after, I'm just trying to figure out exactly, I've been home 10 days, 2011, just at the end of that nasty downturn to the financial crisis. Yeah. We were very fortunate. We were in Botswana, which was one of the best jobs I've ever had in my whole entire life. But it was over, and we either had to come home or stay there and figure out how to stay there. And I came home for family. My mom was 83 at the time, and I had been away for 15 years, and it was time to come home. As an exploration geologist, you miss birthdays, you miss anniversaries, you miss divorces, you miss babies being born, you miss everything. And so I had done that for a long time. So it was just time to come home. And I'm very lucky because I got to come home, and my mom was 83 and she's now 94 and a half. And, I got to reconnect with my brother and my, in-laws. So I came home. And also, I'm just going to say, I got a little bit tired of working in other countries where you make a discovery and then they take it away from you.
Yeah. Or other people make a lot of money, right? I know it's something you and I have talked about. You make a huge discovery and other people make a ton of money.
And you get nothing.
Yeah.
You get a pat on the back. Oh, here's your paycheck. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't even, maybe that's a rabbit hole we don't want to go down tonight, but
we'll take another drink.
Yeah. No, I don't want to get caught out. I had some great bosses in my time.
Yeah, no, but I think it's a really good point. I mean, I think my career has been different than most, in that I think because of family, very similar to yours, I wanted to continue working with my husband after we worked in Afghanistan together for the Pentagon. So I started my first company so that Mark and I could continue working together. And so we could be home for my stepkids, his older kids. So very much the same thing. I don't think I would have ended up being an entrepreneur or starting a company if it wasn't driven by that need for some type of work-life balance. And I think that's really important also for women to hear, perhaps more, I mean, everybody, but women in particular coming into the industry, that there are other paths and that you can change your path. Just because you're working in crazy jurisdictions for 15, 20 years, I think you're overseas, doesn't mean you can't change and come back to Canada, right?
Absolutely. And the other thing about being an exploration geologist, as you know, we do many things. We don't just do geology, and we have all kinds of
Yeah.
geologists. So when you're on the ground in Afghanistan, you're almost like a diplomat, figuring out all
Yeah.
the different things it is that you need to do. When we first got to Cuba, the very first thing I did was call the Canadian embassy. Oh, I live in
Mm-hmm.
a communist country. Tell me what happens if, this, or
Right.
this happens, right? So, and then how are we going to execute on a feasibility study? Where are we going to? So, if you get lucky enough to be a geologist, which I think is the coolest science, I'm going to make a complete pitch
Yeah.
for geology.
Absolutely.
Absolutely coolest science. And then you get to be an exploration geologist. The thing is, you study that as a base and you can be anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
And now in this day and age with technology, it astounds me how far we've come and how different it is from when we were juniors sticking rocks in a bag. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that is still very important and very fundamental, but we would come home and label our rocks and, write them on
Yeah.
the map and then color the map. That doesn't happen anymore. People
Yeah. Not as many colored pencils,
no more.
even since I came in. Like, we don't. Everyone used to have their favorite brand of colored pencils for their their map drawing, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
all digital.
It's all gone.
Yeah.
It's all gone. And it's a completely different way of looking at data and how data comes to you. So yeah, it's super crazy exciting what's going on in the industry right now. I just heard about the Australians have invented a machine that cuts core. And
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen it, but my friend from New Zealand was, "Ooh, you got to get one of these." Wow.
So what does it do? It like cuts.
It
What do
cuts
you
core, it cuts
not?
core automatically. So I don't know. Maybe
Oh.
you somehow you load it in and then
Mhm.
it closes
Like
down.
scanning it.
Yeah, but I don't know how you would cut broken core. And the other thing about somebody doing it manually, just like walking in the bush, you'll never find a mine on a computer. It might help you
Right.
figure out where to go, how to narrow it down, but you're not going to find a deposit on a computer. How do you actually look at the rock and figure out what's in it? And that's what the core cutter is the second level that gets to pick up the rock after the geologist has logged it and cut it. And then he sees the open face, which is again, super cool.
Yeah.
It's all wet, all
Yeah. No,
pretty. Oh, there's the gold. There's
that's the part that I think, unfortunately, or I wish people understood about exploration in particular, is that sense of adventure.
Mhm.
And this idea, again, exploration is different than mining, and they're impressive and cool for very different reasons. But exploration is so cool because it's going out into the unknown, essentially looking for treasure, right? And you have all these adventures along the way, and you work with other people who are excited by that same thing, right? You work with other people that love to be outdoors in the middle of nowhere, figuring out problems, and can get along really well with other people who are quirky and like those same things. It's a really fun space to be in. And I don't think people hear that often enough. And we have, as I say probably every episode, we have great parties because of it. Everyone's got great stories.
Because everyone's so different, and it's geochemists. So you got chemists, geophysicists, right?
Yeah.
Structural geologists, mappers. Now we've got this whole level of IT guys who, design these machines that go to. So yeah, guys who fly, pilots, and then just us, well, old-fashioned exploration geologists like me that go out there and traverse and stick a rock in the bag because you have to start
Yeah.
somewhere, right? You definitely,
Yep.
after the geophysicists have flown their surveys and you've got these big, people look at these, it's funny. This just makes me smile all the time. One of the youngest people on my team said to me, those maps are meaningless. The maps with the pink blobs on them and the blue. And I'm like, are you
Yeah.
kidding? I got all like, are you kidding? You know how expensive they are? You know how much effort and how much science has gone into generating this map with this pink block? Eh? And so what? She said.
Yeah.
And I said, well, this is how you start, right? somebody flies a geophysical survey, and it could be a MAG survey, it could be a VLF survey, it could be anyway, all this, and can imagine the brains that go behind designing the equipment that goes under the plane, that flies over the ground to find something for you.
Oh, I mean, I have to drink 2 bourbons to talk to a geophysicist.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they are some of the smartest people I know. And when they start talking about, inversion techniques and everything, and for those folks who don't know what we're talking about, geophysicists are the folks that use sensors essentially to measure different aspects of the Earth, its magnetic properties, the level of gravity that different rocks essentially hold. I mean, there are all these different sensors you can use that tell you what's below the surface of the Earth, and at the surface, things like hyperspectral sensors, right, that are relatively new to the industry. So there are all these sensors you can fly that give you different levels of data that help you predict what's below the Earth and how big it is.
Maybe.
Right. And
maybe.
We
used to call them geophantasists, right?
Oh,
so they
you still have to prove that it's there, right? You still have to go and take samples and drill.
That's right.
Yeah. So, but I think for me, like, having come into the industry basically at the level of a national program, right, with Afghanistan, doing essentially a national exploration program, digitizing old Soviet geophysical data, old geochem, old maps, and putting it together nationally, and then trying to prioritize what areas of Afghanistan would we go invest more money in doing exploration. That's what I always say, like, all of these tools are a way to de-risk what you're doing and to narrow down the area that you have to look at, because drilling is really expensive, right? So you only want to drill in areas where you think there's a really good chance that you're going to find something.
Well,
so and like my 2-second version of
but it's also your last step. It's also your last step in a scientific progression, right? So you start, you've got the land, you've got the terrain, you've got the topo map. Now we have LiDAR. Thank God for LiDAR technology. And then after that, you layer your geophysics on top of your LiDAR. Then you layer your geology because somebody's gone out. I mean, it's a lot of work to get to, let's put a drill hole here. And the drill hole is this big, or it's a toothpick, right? Depending on how big and the chances of missing this, right? Not impossible, right? Really not impossible. So that's why it's a cool science. It's a super cool science. Because we get all these different kinds of people. We get to work in all these great places in the world. And Afghanistan must have just been cooler than all get out.
Well, it was. I mean, the geology there is phenomenal, and it was relatively untouched. I think the adrenaline aspect of it was due to security and logistical constraints. We would spend months doing data compilation and research on a deposit, and then we would get maybe 2 hours at the site, right? Because you would have all of these military folks that, of course, that's how I met my husband, Mark, he was the guy that was organizing all of that, the aviation, the security, the medical protection, all of that. You would do all of this coordination. You'd have helicopters landing and dune buggies going all over the place, and you'd have 2 hours to get any samples you want, right? And you might have something happen that meant you only got 5 minutes. So it was this exercise of figuring out different, what we would call courses of action. If I've got 8 hours on target, right? What do I want to collect? What's the most important data to get? Where do I need to go to get my samples? And then if I only get 4 hours, what do I do? What's the number one most important thing to do? And it's definitely, I think, kind of shaped the way I approach exploration and even investing,
and getting
because right. Because you can't have any mistakes, right? Because you may only have a very short period of time. So all of those data sets become incredibly important, and anything you could do to work with legacy data or innovative technology to narrow it down from 4 places you want to go to only 2 places, right? It makes a big difference. And luckily we don't, we still work in Afghanistan, but we don't have to do that at every place around the world. But that type of prioritization can be really powerful if you use it in the right way, no matter what kind of business you're doing.
Yeah, what you're describing is completely different than anything I ever had to do. So I was,
Yeah.
I was very fortunate. During my undergraduate, I got to work for the Geological Survey of Canada. So I got to wander around all by
Yeah.
myself in the tundra with an air photo, and we were making maps. And I had this incredible luxury of and I mean, you probably stood out there, but then you all had all of that support. But I used to get dropped off either by boat or by plane, and say, "Here, go hike for 20 kilometers and look at all the rocks you can possibly see, and stick the good ones in a bag, and remember where you found them." And to experience that especially as a student, was magnificent. I mean, that whole feeling of standing on the tundra and being able to turn around and look for 360 degrees and hear nothing except the wind, smell nothing except it. For a city girl, it's like, oh my God, really?
Yeah.
This is a job? No, this isn't a job. This is cool. There's nothing cooler. And then understanding what it is you were looking at. It's funny when people say to me, rocks are boring. And I'm like, are you kidding?
No, I look at them and I see stories. You're probably the same way. I look at rocks, and to me, it's unwinding the whole story of, millions of years of all of the Earth's history that it took to get that rock to look just like that.
Billions,
right?
Yeah, and sometimes billions. So,
Yeah.
I worked with and this is, geologists. We're special. I worked with a guy who said, if you stick your ear really close, they'll talk to you. I remember that. I'm like, really? Okay, Steve, that's a good one. I'm going to start listening because sometimes you get to an outcrop and you don't understand what's going on. It's like, what the heck happened here? Right? And it's a record of what happened 2 billion years ago.
Right.
Just like fossils are a record of, and that's how we measure climate change. Right? We look at ice cores. We look at, what happened in the geological record. We know it was really hot. And we know it got really cold. We know these glaciers came and they eliminated a whole bunch of stuff. So, you got to look and you got to listen. Yeah.
Well, and every once in a while you have to lick the rock, right?
All the time. But don't lick the drill core.
Well, that's what I say that because when we were working in Afghanistan, first of all, we were working with a lot of industry geologists that we brought onto the program because they were experts, right? And we're trying to attract industry attention and investment to Afghanistan. And they would come in and have this huge adjustment period because they were used to being dropped off in the middle of nowhere on a helicopter and allowed to wander around and look for stuff. Mark used to call it the Easter egg hunt, right? They'd want to go off on an Easter egg hunt. He's like, you can't do that because of where we are. But also this one geologist, and I won't name him, but anytime he was in front of our military colleagues to mess with them, he would start licking the rock samples. And before you knew it, our team had this nickname in Afghanistan. We were called the Rock Lickers. Like that was our code name, right? And folks just never understood, like, why are they licking the rocks? And in this flash forward a few years, my father-in-law is a oil and gas engineer based in Australia. And when Madeline, my daughter, was probably about 6 months old, we went to Australia and they have a horse farm. And we were sitting in the paddock having an argument over whether Madeline would grow up to be a geologist or an engineer, right? Of course, in the industry, there's this back and forth between the engineers and the geologists about who's better. And Madeline reached down and picked up a rock and licked it right in front of him. And that solved the argument. It was, it's in the genetics right there.
Fantastic story.
Like you couldn't have made it up. Just picked up a rock and
that is a fantastic story. Well, that's total. Yeah, that's divine intervention. Right.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. For people who don't understand why geologists lick rocks, all you have to think about is what a rock looks like or a pebble looks like when it's underwater in a stream and how pretty it looks. And that's pretty much explains why we lick them, because we can see things better. So we're really not kooky. There is a practical reason to lick your rocks. But as I said, you never lick your drill core.
So why do you never lick your drill core?
Oh, I'm like, probably shouldn't say this because my drillers are listening. But if you know, drillers like engineers and geologists, drillers and geologists sometimes don't always get along because the geologist is effectively the boss.
Mm-hmm.
And if you piss your driller off, then they pee on your core. Or they used to. Maybe they don't anymore.
Yeah.
Anyway, you hose it.
This is insider knowledge right here. This is stuff that you will not hear on any of the other podcasts that are out there.
No, I mean, they don't tell you this at university either. Ever.
No.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. Well, with that, I think we're going to switch over. So we had some of our prospector employees who are relatively new to the industry send in some questions because Danielle is a PG. First of all, would you like to explain what that means? Because I am a geologist. I mean, I have a geology degree, but I am not a PG. So what is the difference and what should people look for when they see that after somebody's name? Like, what does that indicate?
Okay. So PGO is just like PEng. And when I graduated from school, you did not have to get a PGO. And the reason you didn't have to get it was you could just be a geologist and you could just go to work and you could be hired as a geologist. In the 90s, mid 90s, when that whole scandal, the Briek scandal came to be, and they said they went from 100,000 ounces to 20 or 4, some crazy ass number, and the share price went from 25 cents to well over $100, and then they found out it was a complete and total scam. Then the banking industry was super pissed off, although they pretty much deserve what they get. But they were super pissed off. And then there was all this legislation put in place. Everybody got together and said, well, you can't be a geologist unless you write an exam and you sign a code of ethics and you all these things. So you
have to be members of a certain number of associations, right? Yeah.
So that's where it comes from. And so it's relatively new. And it has evolved from the mid 90s, 2000. I think I'm trying to remember when I wrote my exam, because I wrote my exam after I worked in Ecuador.
Oh, okay.
So, and that would have been mid 2006, 2007. So yeah, it's new. So that's all that means. You can go to school and study geology, and don't let somebody say you have to be a PGO stand in the way, because you don't. Geology, like archaeology, like any science, is cool. Study it. And then when you get to the end of that degree, then you make your decision. Lots of people take engineering degrees and don't become PEngs. Lots of people study law and don't go to the bar. So if you like something, study it. If it's food for your brain, take that on. So that's where all of that comes from. And so then as a result of that, then came the 43 101s, and then came all the definitions and the definitions and the legislation, PEA, measured, indicated, inferred, no more guessing. No more arm waving, we call it, right? Because people used to arm wave. How do you convince the world that you've got 40 million ounces overnight, unless you totally fabricated the timelines from when they first found that? I mean, didn't they make a movie? They made a movie.
I think so. Yeah, I don't remember. I need to pull up what it was. Yeah, they did. And I think the other important thing, though, about the PGO or the PG is, in order to have a 43 101, it has to be signed off on by what they call a qualified person, right? A QP, which I always explain to folks outside the industry is almost like an auditor for your geology work, right? And typically that's a PG or a PGO. So if you're looking at a project and they don't have a 43101, or they're saying they have some other report that maybe they don't have a PG or PGO that's signed off on it, that should raise some questions and some alarm bells, right? Because that is the industry standard now, is you have to have that qualified person sign off on what you're claiming as far as how big and how you're going to build your deposit.
But I'm just also going to say that you have to, just because somebody put a stamp on it, right? You still got to
you still have to ask.
You still got to do your due diligence. Bridges fail. You just have to always do your due diligence. So if it's got a 43101 and there's a PGO stamp on it, then you can go to the website for the APGO in Canada and find out, or the different jurisdictions anyway, and find out who that person is, and if they've had any sanctions against them or anyone's called to complain, because people get hired and people write what, and you know, when the whole PGO thing came out, I was thrilled, because prior to that, when you worked for people, they wanted you to report what they wanted you to report, and you had a hard time if you knew it was sketchy,
rubbish,
or a little bit over promotional, or so. The whole PGO thing was fantastic, because then we could say to people, well, you know what, I'm a PGO and I'm not going to lose my professional status, reputation, and they couldn't push as hard as they want to. Now that doesn't mean people can't be bought. Lots of people can be, so that's why still, again, you have to do your due diligence, but as a rule, getting your PGO and your status is, you only have one reputation. This is what I like to say to the kids. You only have one reputation, and it's yours. And who do you want to sleep with? You know, you wake up in the morning and you know you did something that was wrong and against the code of ethics. Is that the person you want to be? Well, if that's the person you want to be, that's the person you want to be. Great, because that gets around. We all know that gets
right, and it gets around fast, especially at the keg or the library bar.
Exactly.
Right. I mean, folks find out real quick. Right. Yeah.
It's only, and now in this day and age with social media, oh my God, right? Yeah. Who's this person, right? Or our networks, right. You know, women in mining. Anybody know this person? Yeah.
Right.
Should I go into an isolated bush camp with these people or that organization? I just had a talk with a geologist who was underwhelmed by the COVID-19 response as a company that he was working with put in place. They essentially put that in place. So, you know, that gets around. Those people don't care about their people. They don't care about the community they're in, and they don't care about their people. Right? What's that?
Yeah, and I think that's the part that you know, companies have to really pay attention to the fact that our industry is increasingly transparent, and you can't fight it, right? Because of social media, because of technology, and the ability to move information and share information. You have to, I mean, it really is an accountability measure to hold companies in check. Because if you're not doing things the right way, if you're not taking care of your people and the community that you're working in, people are going to find out. And if you're an investor, it's increasingly easy to figure out which companies are doing it the right way.
Absolutely.
Right. And investors, if you care about those things, you can find companies that are doing it the right way and put your money there. Right. Because those companies are also working on great assets. It's not like, you know, only the dodgy folks have access to the good geology.
Right. Right. No, it's an interesting business, and it's got a very interesting past, you know, with you marry all of those scientists, those fun kind of people who like to be in the bush, who don't care about the market. And then you marry the market and all that money and all those promoters and then all that, oh my God, you know, you can take a 10-cent stock and you mix all of that up and it's a ride. It's definitely, it's definitely, and look at the people we know. To get, you know,
oh my God,
we just recently met, but look at our collective group of people and how much fun they are and how diverse they are and how different we all are. And
Mhm.
I love that about my life and about my job because I could never, well, I was never the person that was going to do this same thing every day anyway. I tried that, wasn't very good at it.
Yeah,
So,
me
yeah,
either.
yeah, call us ADD.
Yeah.
I don't know, call us something, call us whatever. But it wasn't. I wasn't that person that was going to the same office every single day and doing the same thing every day. And I value those people
Mhm.
because it, society needs.
Someone's got
Yeah, we do need people who can.
who like that
Yeah,
structure. Yeah.
yeah. I
No, I'm with you, and I think people also forget. Like we talk about, especially in our circle, we talk about the need for diversity and inclusion in the industry. And typically, when we talk about that, we're talking about a very specific part of the industry because people forget that mining happens all over the world, and there are people, working in exploration and in mines from the countries that those mines are in, right? From very different cultures and from very different backgrounds. And when you're active in the industry on the ground, whether it's in exploration or in mining, you do work with people from everywhere, right? And
yeah,
you do work with a really diverse group of people. So I also think that's something that we oftentimes lose sight of, that even though there's always a need for diversity and inclusion, especially at the management and the board level, and all of that, for people who are looking at the industry, I don't want them to get kind of scared off by that, because if you're active in the industry, it's incredibly diverse
yeah.
when you're out.
Well, then that's what makes it so great,
Right.
right? Even working with all those engineers. Did I say that?
That's right. And those drillers, right?
Oh my God! And aren't they a lot of fun? They definitely are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, they've
But
got the best jokes.
that industry is changing too, Emily. Those guys are
Yeah.
completely different. Yeah, and
Mm.
here's an example. In our last drilling campaign, our I was driving by the property and I saw this Mercedes parked in front of this trailer, and I was thought, oh, geez, yeah, who's got the Merc? You know, did some kind
Yeah.
of you know high roller come
Oh,
into
sure.
town? It's our drillers from Quebec. They
Mm.
our project is so close to their hometown, they can drive to and from work 40 minutes, no big deal.
Yeah.
But not only that, these guys are smart and super well paid. So
Mm.
no turning your nose up to any part of
Yeah.
this industry. Our drillers
No.
have highly skilled guys running
Yeah.
highly, very sophisticated machinery. Back in the day, geologists used to think that they were better than it. They're not better, I mean,
Right.
they're not. And these, and anyway, I thought it was like, wow. So
I
my
used to
brother's
get
got a Merc,
with
and
the
I'm driving a 2004 Volkswagen convertible.
but I used to hear from one of the drillers I worked with. He said, "Yeah, you geologists always say you can read the rocks. Well, I can feel the rocks." Right? And I can tell from the way the drill is reacting exactly what we're hitting and what we're going to see.
Wow.
Right. So you're absolutely right. You can't, I mean, it takes every part of that process and really skilled people,
Yeah.
but they know what they're doing. And it's a specialty for sure.
Well, and they're front line and they're insiders, but they're not.
Right.
They get to see the
Yeah.
core first. And
True.
I mean, if they're really smart, I mean, if they're and they are sophisticated in the ways of the junior space, or they know what they're buying or not buying, and they know how the company's
I
run, right? They know how well they're treated, how well they're
think.
not treated,
Hmm.
and that gets out too, right? Right.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's interesting you say that about the drillers, because I just was having a meeting with a company. I'll give a little shout out, with Ridgeline in Nevada.
yeah, good one.
And yeah, and I was talking to their management team, and one of the cool things that they did was bring in their drilling team as a partner at the very beginning, right? And I thought that I had never heard that. They also did a really creative structure with the laboratory that they're working with, really kind of a partnership. And I know you've done similar things even with your drilling team. I know from when we've talked. I mean, it does become a real partnership there on the ground, and they're critically important to getting things done.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see how those relationships evolve from kind of those generalizations and maybe historically what folks thought about different groups in the industry to where they are now.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a complete function of that breaking down of the barriers and
Hmm.
letting all kinds in, including us
Yeah.
girls. Yeah, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? There, it's
Yeah.
just there's no room for any kind of pretense. You know, an
Hmm.
exploration geologist is nobody without a driller. You know, we
True.
don't even start our job without a prospector. So don't
Mhm.
undervalue anybody that's any part of this process ever, right? It's not going
Yeah.
to serve you well, right? Because
Yeah. Don't undervalue the people who got you there and the people who are going to take you to the next step.
that's right.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
They're all super important. And if you can make them
Mhm.
partners and give them shares, that's super cool, right? But
Yeah.
it depends on your corp structure and all of that kind
Sure.
of stuff, how much you want to give up. But yeah, yeah. Yeah, good. Good. It's
No,
exciting.
there are lots of interesting models out there, and with that, we got a request from our relatively new to the industry employees to do a segment that we're going to call Ask the Geologist. So our team at Prospector, of course, works with 43101 reports basically all day, every day. That's the kind of main database that we use our artificial intelligence to allow investors and researchers to go through. And as our team was working with these reports, they of course had some questions about what these reports mean in different terms. And I thought, who better to ask than Danielle?
No, there's probably better engineers, but I'll give it a kick of the can here. It
No.
depends on the question.
Yeah. So we'll throw them out here. So first question, what's the difference between mineral resources and mineral reserves? And why would some reports not have a reserve estimate?
Okay, well, if it doesn't have a reserve estimate, then it's because they haven't found one, right? So
Mm,
you don't get to report on having something until you've found it. So when you're looking at a 43-101, you have to look at the beginning and find out if it's a report that calls a project. I think the term is project of merit, or it's a technical report. So, for example,
mhm,
Warrior Gold, we don't have a 43-101 that's going to give you a resource. We've got a
mhm.
43-101 that describes a project that is of merit. And then
Right.
and then after a whole bunch of money is spent, and you can tell how much money's been spent on the project, and if they found anything, in the first chapters, you see the history. And then they'll
Mhm.
say X amount of drilling to drill off this. And I'll just
Right.
say one thing about that is, in our case, because I was just talking to a colleague who said, you've got a big project, and so far you're only focusing on one area. And what's going to happen, or what ends up happening, is everybody's going to want you to drill off a resource, and you're not going to get to explore. So it's like, well, but we just started. But people want numbers. How much gold do
Yeah.
you have? Everyone says that to me. How much gold do you have?
Mhm.
I don't know. I hope we have millions of ounces. We have a million sniff. We've got a lot of sniffs at surface. So you have to figure out where you are on the Lassonde curve, which I can send you.
Mhm.
Um, and Brent Cook put it very nicely on the when to buy and when to sell. But it's the evolution of an exploration project and then how it gets into. So all of that.
So for listeners, Google Lassonde curve, right? And you'll see what Danielle's talking about. And it talks about trends or kind of when a typical mining investor or exploration investor invests and when they don't, based on the level of risk, right? It's essentially what you're looking at.
Yeah. Pre-discovery, discovery,
Mhm.
feasibility, building the mine. Oh, you built the mine. It's going to take you a long time to work the kinks out of building that mine. And then once you're into full production, and your share price is going to go back up. And then you're producing
Right.
gold. And then you're producing gold, and oh, goodness gracious me, the price of gold goes down. It'll cost you more to fill the tanks of the cars. But anyway, so that's the answer. When they're looking at a 43-101, and your team is probably bored out of their minds because they're not in the place where that report was written. So I would suggest, and I'll give a shout out to Verify. Verify's doing
Oh,
well because they're doing a brilliant job, and same with Moon Patrol, of taking you and putting you in the place where that report or that project is. And you use Google Maps, or you use Moon Patrol's got illustrations, but it puts you in that place so you can actually stand there and look around. And then that gives you an idea of how far down the road they are, right? And do they have a resource? It's super cool. 3D underground. This is what I was talking about earlier with the technology. All those drill holes, they define out a body. That's a mineral resource. And then you want to know if it's if they've actually measured it or if they're guessing, right? And that was the inferred part of that. So I don't envy anybody who has to go through 43 101s. So I would say definitely start with Google Maps. Take that project and figure out what that looks like, and that'll give you a better sense of what's going on, right? So, and I
would say, in general, a proven reserve is something that they know to the highest level of certainty in a report, right? As opposed to you have various levels of resources. Resources are less certain because they've put less money in the ground, they've done less drilling, less modeling. So anytime you see a company with a reserve estimate, there's a lower level of risk because there's a higher level of certainty. You might make less money investing in that project, right? Because it's less risky. The people that go in early, and really trust that the company is doing good work early on, right, have the best chance at doing really well.
Right.
Would that be accurate?
Yep, that's totally fair and totally accurate. And even then, when somebody's got a resource, you have to figure out if it's a 43 101 compliant resource, which means they have they're not using old numbers, because a lot of people talk about resources that are non 43 101 compliant. So those are back in the old days, you could drill a hole here and you could drill a hole over here, and they'd say, oh, those were connected. Oh, we got 1 million tons. No, you don't, right? Oh, the grade was 7 grams here, and especially in the Abitibi, which is, is hard finding. I mean, it's not hard to find gold in the Abitibi, but it's finding the big zone of gold. So because it's an old system and there's a lot of structures, there's a lot of smells of gold everywhere. It leaks. So what you're looking for is the heart, the big bit. When someone says, oh, yeah, we've got VG. Yeah, really? How much? Like how much and how continuous is it?
So for those who don't know, what is the Abitibi?
Oh, okay. The Abitibi Greenstone Belt is one of the richest and highest grade greenstone belts in northern Ontario, Quebec, Ontario. It's 750 kilometers long. It's 2.7 to 3 something billion years old. And it's an old Archean greenstone belt. And that just means it's an active volcanic zone that has a lot of structures that, here's super arm waving geologist stuff, but that go super deep and tap into the mantle, and the fluids leak out to the surface and deposit gold mines. And in some places you get a whole lot of them, like Kirkland Lake, off Kirkland Lake break, and then it's spotty. Timmins has got 90 million ounces of gold. The Quebec side's got a whole bunch. So anyway, it's an Archean greenstone belt that's super old, that's got a lot of value. And they've got them everywhere. There's one in Australia, there's some in Africa. They're just old rocks.
And Warrior Gold's asset is, of course, in that area, right? And this is where you're working. Yeah. All right. So next question from our team. How does the process of creating a resource and reserve estimate work, and how reliable are these estimates?
Oh,
so you talk. Yeah, we might need another podcast for that question.
That's a good question, and actually, you could have a lot of fun with a podcast with that, because there's a lot of reports that have been done and they have failed, right? Because the drill spacing wasn't right. So I would say it depends on who's doing it, and even then. And then you have to look at the drill spacing. So you have to look at the geological model to get an understanding of what it is they're trying to drill off, and then how close their drills were, because it's like guessing. It's not like guessing, but it is like guessing when you drop a diamond drill hole down and you've got one here and then you've got one there. And let's just use my scarf for example, which I never thought of, right? But over here, we
Yeah.
drop the drill hole down and it's red, and this is a nice gold zone. And then we drop the drill hole down over here, and we cut the top end of that. We can't say that it's all red in between.
Right.
And sometimes people do models and they go, oh, it's red there and it's red there. Let's just join. No. So, yeah, it really depends on who's doing it. And, yeah, you got to be super careful.
And this is where I would go back to our earlier point, where when you're looking at these technical reports or a presentation and they're talking about an ore body or a deposit model and they're talking about drill results, the ultimate test is if you ask them a question that's very simple, can they explain it to you, right, in a way that really makes sense? I think because, again, if you approach it like you would any other business and you ask those basic investment questions, you should be able to get an answer that you understand and can verify and do your own research on, right? Because these are technical things and there is a high level of risk. So you really have to ask the question. And what we try to do at Prospector is at least get investors to look at the technical reports, right? Look at the 43101s, because there is a lot of baseline data there that you can at least use to start to ask those questions. Right. So you're kind of coming in it more informed.
Right. Well, as you said earlier, everybody's got a great project with lots of gold showings. So what makes one better than the other? I don't know how many junior companies are listed on the stock exchange. As the price of gold increases, there's going to be an incredible amount more of these things showing up that were worthless. And, today they're not quite so worthless. And, some of them will have merit, but put your checklist together, boys and girls. Jurisdiction, team, prospectivity, are you in complete moose pasture, or do they have other mines next door to them? Some people are working on discovering new belts in the Northwest Territories. They've got just because they've got millions and millions of acres doesn't really mean anything. It really doesn't.
If there's nothing in the acres.
It means you're going to spend a lot of money getting there and a lot of money looking. Right. So the haystack is huge, and the potential to find something is magnificent. It's going to take a long time and a wackado. So, and it's exciting too, but you better be there for the long haul, right?
And you have to know what your own appetite for risk is. Right. Some people like that. Some people like the risk and the potential reward of that big swing, right? Other folks want to minimize risk.
Yeah.
Well, and then another question we got was, what is the difference between a pre-feasibility assessment, feasibility study, and preliminary economic assessment? So those are beyond the 43101 technical reports. What do those reports mean?
Yeah, well, that for the most part, that means the engineers are showing up and I'm gone. Right. But I have been part of the preliminary economic assessment. So we find something. So we think we found something. So then you drill it out and you go, we got, 500,000 ounces, 750. We're on our way to 1 million ounces. Then while you're getting there, someone's going to go, okay, so what are the odds of you getting this, from first base to second and third? And then they take a look at not just the continuity and the grade of the ore that you found and the depth at which it's at, but, what if the neighbors aren't going to let you build your mine? What if you're in the middle of nowhere and it's going to cost you $1 gazillion to put a road in? What if you...
Right.
So PEA is the very first basic, here's the fabric, here's the pattern, here's the needle and threads, until you get to the next level, which is to build that dress, which is when you do your feasibility. And you can't get money to advance your project until you've looked at some of those questions, right? So.
Yeah. And this is where I always remind people that you can have the most fantastic deposit, but if it costs you more money to take that metal out of the ground than the metal is worth, it's still not worth doing, right? And that's, in my mind, that's where these become really important. The engineers come in and figure out how you're going to do it and really how much will it cost.
Right.
Because the geology can be phenomenal, but that's where, like you said, it may not be worth building if you're not going to make any money.
Well, and
which is
where you've been in Afghanistan. And Rico Dig in Pakistan, which is a phenomenal deposit. Just phenomenal. Mm-hmm. When I'm like, holy Toledo. But get that to market.
Yep. Right. And they had, Rico Jack had Barrack there, right? You had Barrack on the Afghan-Pakistan border, really essentially in the middle of nowhere, working on that because it was such an enormous deposit.
It's phenomenal.
And on the Afghan, for my Afghan friends and colleagues, and it does go over the border. You can see, geology doesn't stop at national borders either, right? But that's where I think, some of these jurisdictions, there is phenomenal geology all over the world that still has to be explored. But you've got to have infrastructure, you've got to have legal and regulatory structures and support that's reliable, because you can have the most amazing anywhere in the world, but money is not going to come in and build a mine if you don't have those other things.
Yeah, and if you don't have a community that wants you there,
right,
it's never going to happen either. So everybody has to win now. Like everybody has to win. The environment wins, the community wins, the workers win, everybody has to win. And that's one of the things I love about how this industry has changed and will change and will continue to change. And with the new generation, right? Ask the important questions, right?
Yeah. Well, and that's one of our last questions is when you're looking at company reports, how do you determine a company's environmental or ESG strategy in order to figure out what they're doing with ESG?
Yeah, ESG is, what is it? Environmental, social, and governance. Yeah, and it's a relatively new term. Because prior to that, we had another one. And I think it's all great because it's an evolving science. So that's fantastic. ESG, I think there is a whole system in place now that the World Bank and the Equator Principles, everybody's putting in a reporting system for ESG. Typically, it's very expensive. You have to have a whole team to do it. So you would only look at a major mining company or a mid-tier mining company to look for that data. When it comes to a junior exploration company, you read their MD&A, which every quarter.
What's an MD&A?
Management Discussion and Analysis. And it comes out every quarter, and you're obliged to essentially say it's like your monthly report, except it's condensed into 3 months. So you have to tell everybody, if you're a publicly traded company, how you've spent their money and what you found and what you're planning on doing next. So there is a level of transparency there. And then if you got to be able to read through it, stay away from, it's all there. The finances are there and the guts and the glory are there. So.
Well, and I think the challenge for me with the focus on ESG is having worked in emerging and even post-conflict countries, but also anywhere you go in the world, the true test of a company's intention with a community and their environmental footprint, right, and what they're trying to do with the project is really right there at the very local level. And who are the people that they hire? And how do those people interact with the local community, or are they from the local community, right? Which is best case scenario for a lot of these things. And so it's also looking at that, right? Who is the company and what do those people represent and what are they doing on a day-by-day basis? Is it really just marketing, gobbledygook when they talk about ESG, or can they give you really concrete examples beyond just funding some education program or a clinic, right? I'm always impressed when I talk to companies who are pitching for investment if they talk about local engagement without me asking them, right? I mean, that's a big thing. Or how entrenched they are in the community, because in more developed markets, it's not going to look the same as if you're in the middle of nowhere in, Eastern Africa or Central Asia, right? But you still have to have ESG principles at play in Ontario, right? What does that look like for Ontario?
Right.
It's equally important for the community to want you there and value you and feel that you're invested in their success, right? And it really comes down to, who are you hiring? Who do you have on the ground? Who's making decisions? And what do those people care about? And do they follow through with what they tell you they're going to do?
Right. Exactly. Right. And, when the drill leaves, on a practical sense, when the drill leaves, what's the site look like? Yeah.
Right.
Did they leave trash? Are there, what's it look like? If it doesn't look like it should have looked like, and that's the nice thing about exploration, right? It doesn't take much for us to rehab anything. It's essentially it's tidy up and then throw down some grass seed. So it doesn't hurt to look, which is the early steps. It's the miners that have the bigger job. Absolutely. They definitely have the bigger job because they are doing the lion's share of the work, right? So,
but I always tell folks on our team, I still work by that old Boy Scout motto: leave the campsite cleaner than you found it.
That's right.
Right. So even if it wasn't you that caused that problem or left that trash, pick it up, clean it up, do better. Right. And you're going to, and that we just do it that way because it's the way it should be done.
Absolutely. It's not hard. It's like I say to people, it's not rocket science. Exploration is not rocket science, right?
True. No, I remind people, like, we've been, we as a species have been doing mining for a long time.
Yeah. From the beginning of time.
Figured out how to find cool rocks and use them for different things for a really long time. So, like, since the Bronze Age, right? Yeah. And even before, technically. Exactly. So even though we can do it with all kinds of cool technology, you're right. It's not rocket science until we start, mining asteroids and stuff. And then I guess technically.
And good luck with that. I think that's a fantastic idea, but good luck with that. So
I'm a big fan of science fiction, but I am happy to be what we now call a terrestrial miner, right? Or a terrestrial geologist.
Absolutely. And I'm happy to be working in North America.
Yeah, we're done.
Good.
So cheers to that. One more swig. And and we will wrap up. And I look forward to having you on again soon.
Thank you. It was fun.